Welcome to Broadway Drumming 101. Today, my guest is Andrew Beall. How are you today?
Hey, we've just been talking for 20 minutes and we said, hey, shouldn't we press record? This is good. I'm happy to be here. Thank you.
Yes, we've had a good 20-minute conversation about things that I probably should have hit record before, but other things I'm glad we didn't. But
We'll say it again.
your social security number is, no, I'm just kidding.
Yeah. My password is this Broadway Drumming 101.
That's a good password, everybody.
Yeah.
Everybody use Broadway Drumming 101 as your password for everything. And I'll be like, oh, yeah, I see you're outside in the middle of New York City. Are you originally from this wonderful, amazing city?
You're right. I am outside. This is my courtyard. It's so nice out here. This is where I do a lot of work. I do a lot of orchestration, a lot of writing out here. There's a little scaffolding there that's not as nice as if without, but this is New York City right here. No, I'm originally from Ohio, originally from Columbus, Ohio, and moved here for a dream of playing on Broadway.
Really?
Yeah, that was the dream. I went to school here and went to Manhattan School of Music and then NYU. But yeah, I moved here. I transferred from Ohio State University, moved here when I was 20. Within 3 years, I started subbing on The Lion King. That was my first show.
So
So
is it the Ohio State University?
yes, exactly. It's the Ohio State. And there's so much pride with the Buckeyes. And I have to say that we really appreciate it. But when I was at Ohio State for 2 years, I think I only went to one game in the Horseshoe. The stadium was right behind me. And I really appreciated the tailgating and the parties and the camaraderie and the fun. But I was just like, I was in the practice room all the time. I was just so closed, tunnel vision to once I was in the music school and there was something always to be done and getting better at. So I didn't get to enjoy it, but all my family are avid Buckeyes and OSU fans. Nowadays, I'm more of a tennis fan. I love going to the US Open and playing tennis, but I love that they are so into it. It's cool. I just was too busy practicing to go to many games.
So speaking of tennis, little tangent here.
Yeah.
About a month ago, I was hanging out with my son and we saw this pickleball court and my
Mm.
son had played before. And I was like, okay, because the ball came towards us. I picked it up. It's, oh, this is interesting. So I gave it back to the players and he said, you want to play? So we wound up playing a game of pickleball. Of course, I destroyed him, but
Yeah. Yeah. Pickleball is the fastest growing sport, I think, in the world right now, or at least in the country. Over the last 2 years, it's become so popular. And there's avid tennis players who are annoyed with it because it's not tennis. I'm not one of those. I like pickleball. I like ping pong. It's been between ping pong and tennis. And so, yeah, it's a great game to play. And there's courts in Central Park. There's courts in Central Park. There's courts all over the city.
mm.
So, yeah. Yeah.
So when you were younger, I don't know when you first started playing, was the first thing you saw somebody playing drums, and you're like, that's what I want to do, but not what you're doing. I want to play on Broadway.
Oh, okay. Yes. No. Yes to yes. Yes to both. So the first thing I wanted to do was be a drum set player because, yeah, I must have been, gosh, I started studying when I was 11. It's late these days. But I think probably around 8 or 9, we were at some sort of a festival. I want to say it was like a Renaissance festival, but it doesn't really make sense because there was a rock band there. So it must have been some other festival. And I saw the drummer playing and he was making everyone dance. And so right off the bat, I'm like, that looks cool. I want to make it. And back then I was super shy. So I wasn't one to dance myself, but I like to make people dance. And so that's when I first said, hey, I want to do that. I want to be a drummer. And so, yeah, I studied drums and rudimental drumming was my big thing all the way through a lot of college, the first couple of years of college, definitely through high school. I didn't start playing mallet instruments until maybe junior year of high school. I couldn't really read music that well, but I could read the rudimental drumming. I marched some drum corps. And so that was a big thing in the Midwest. And that's how I started that. And then my parents would take me to New York and we'd see Broadway shows like once a year. And I remember my dad taking me to see Miss Saigon. And that was in the 90s. That was the very first show I saw, my mom took me to at the Ohio Theater in Ohio. And that was Tommy, the Who's Tommy, which had a great drum book and was just revived on Broadway, which was so cool. The first time I'd seen it since. So that was the very first Broadway show I saw on tour. But one of the first shows I saw on Broadway was Miss Saigon. And that became my favorite show, not only because of the cool percussion. I remember talking to Larry Lilly and he said that was the show that got him into it because of the percussion in it. But so it wasn't just how cool the percussion was. It was also in the drums. It was also just the story was just so epic. The score was so sweeping and moving and stuff. I don't know if you ever got to see that. Orlando, we were talking about Orlando earlier. He played that show. I think Ray Marchico was the drummer for the last revival. And so I don't know, the score was so cool. And it was such a dramatic, and the stuff that I write generally has a dramatic edge to it. I was commissioned to write one musical that was a comedy, which I tried to turn down because didn't think I was the right guy. But anyway, it ended up being a good learning experience. And it was challenging, but because I was like, basically, hey guys, I only write, like, I'm more of a dramatic writer. I don't know anything about comedy, but I'm glad I did it. It was a really good show, and I learned a lot. But yeah, so it was Miss Saigon that really got me to be like, oh, I want to move to New York. And it was really because of the making of Miss Saigon DVDs. I would watch these creatives in the room, in some like rehearsal room in Midtown with the lights of Broadway outside. You could see Cat's lights like outside flashing in the 90s, and this New York gritty look from the camera. And I'm thinking, they're just creating this like show right here. And that's what I want to do. At that point, I didn't know I wanted to create, but I knew that I wanted to play. So just watching that video when I was like 14 gave me that kind of inspiration to move to New York. And then when I'd go, I'd always walk down to the front of the pit and see the musicians. And it always just seemed, as when you walk down and look at this sea of musicians, of the best musicians, it feels like this other world that's so cool that, wow, if I could just be one of those guys, if I could be a part of that, would be dream come true. So that was it. I went to a conservatory that was focused on orchestral percussion and winning an orchestral job. But right off the bat, I told my teachers, my goal is Broadway. What should I do? And I definitely learned, because I was into drum set and rudimental drumming early on. I hadn't really practiced an orchestral excerpt or anything like that. So until I was preparing my audition to transfer to Manhattan School of Music. And so then I definitely learned a lot about, and I love playing an orchestra, and that's maybe half of what I do now still. But yeah, my goal was always Broadway because of the storytelling aspect of it. I love, like, when I write what's called programmatic music, which is music that tells a story or has a theme. And so it's just, so if you go to see a symphony orchestra, it's just the orchestra on stage, which is awesome. But a Broadway show is that plus acting, plus lights, plus sets, plus movement, plus wardrobe, plus hair. And so when all those elements come together and they're perfect, it's just magical. I think it's absolute magic when all this perfect storm of all the elements of a show come together. And that's what really drew me to it. It's larger than life. And it also helps people escape. If they need 2 hours to just get off the streets in New York, or they're tourists and they're like wanting to be entertained, it's a good way. The reason why I was really into Broadway as opposed to another genre is because I also knew in the back of my mind, some of these families saved up the entire year to come see the show or to come to New York. And so they're all in a good mood. They're all happy to be there. And so they've already paid for the tickets. So now they're just happy to be entertained and be moved or be taken away. So that aspect of it, I knew from an early age was a really cool thing for it. And when I conducted my first musical that I wrote, and we had a production in Indiana, and I remember looking at the sea of an audience, and I'm like, these people are watching that show that I wrote, and I'm conducting it. This is the coolest thing. And I realized it's really a public service. I'm really helping these people have a good night, have a good time. And that was pretty awesome. It's pretty awesome to be able to do that.
When you were younger, you saw this drummer playing. Other than that person, were there other drummers that you saw either on TV, on the radio, or friends, family, or other percussionists that, this person, that person, I want to be like them?
Oh yeah. Let's see. Gosh, I think one of my favorite drummers of all time, who's still kicking a lot of butt, is Teddy Campbell. I saw him play, but that was not in the beginning, but I'd done one gig with him in Texas in the early 2000s. And that's the first time I'd seen him play. And I think at that point he was just starting American Idols, being American Idols drummer. And so I was watching him on American Idol, and just everything he did was, we can talk different ideas about drummers who were always in the pocket, but don't do too much. He was a drummer who I think was always in the pocket, but did some things that I'm like, I have no idea what he just did. And that was exciting to me. Not to say that he's definitely not too busy. He wasn't that, but it was just, anytime he played a fill, not only was it was a perfect time, it was so over the bar line and so cool. And I was like, I don't even know what he's doing, but that's cool. And he came from a gospel tradition, and that's how he grew up playing. And we became friends. And then I brought him out. I was the Percussive Arts Society New York president for 6 years. And so I was able to bring out artists from all around. And so I brought him out to do a clinic at NYU. We did it for 6 years. And it was a weekend of percussion, always in February, I think February and March. And I brought him out to do a clinic. And it was just the same thing when I first saw him play. It was like, this guy, so he's probably one of my favorites. Another one that he recommended to me when I wrote this song during the pandemic, I wrote this song called This Is Your Show. It was for a national organization called Compassion and Choices. And we were going to record the album. And I knew when writing the song, I knew I wanted to hire the Harlem Gospel Choir to sing in it. And so I knew I wanted to get a good gospel drummer. So I asked Teddy, and Teddy initially was going to do it. And then he ended up recommending Calvin Rogers, who ended up doing it. And Calvin was just great. I'll never forget the first time I got his demo tracks, and I'm in my kitchen cooking, and I just hear the first bar, and I'm like, yep, this is it. So I think those two were great drummers. Early on those are still my two really some of my favorite drummers. But early on, I was a prog rock kind of guy, I'd say, in high school. So Mike Portnoy and Dream Theater was a big influence. I played in a bunch of bands in high school. Well, I was playing more of a rock blues band, but I always was trying to get them to do the more stuff where I could use double pedal. He had one of those huge Neil Peart drum sets, type looking drum sets, and I had a poster of Neil Peart behind me when I was 14, 15. So yeah, Rush and Neil Peart with Rush and Mike Portnoy with Dream Theater. Mike Portnoy did the coolest groove on this song called Under a Glass Moon from I think it was their first or second album. And he was just riding on a tambourine and doing this double kick thing. It was just so cool. And I remember thinking that really hooked me for a while. So I grew up with that. Before that, believe it or not, it was Kiko Torres from Bon Jovi. I loved his very straight ahead, simple, but perfect grooves for those songs. One, The Dead or Alive had this really cool ride thing going on. But yeah, it was, and as from Memphis and David Bryan, you probably met all those guys at some point. But yeah, I have an eclectic group of influences, I'd say, from that list there. Yeah. And of course, I used to watch the Buddy Rich Memorial.
Oh my God.
VHS.
Yes.
All those drummers on there were influences.
One of my favorites from that was the trio of Dave Weckl, Vinnie Colaiuta, and Steve Gadd.
Yes. Yeah.
And Steve Gadd's in the center, and Steve is just doing his thing, which is just magical. Dave Weckl does his thing, and Vinnie Colaiuta's man. It's like three
that was
kind of separate, different styles, but then they all work in their own way.
That one, and I think Greg Bissonette was on one, and he did this fill, and you go back and watch that, and you'll know exactly what I'm talking about. He goes, black, and he's doing the whole thing with the right hand. That was one of the ones that stands out. But yeah, I think the one that you just mentioned was probably my favorite. Oh, and of course, Dave Weckl was a big influence. How could I forget? My very first drum video. This is a funny story because my dad, I guess Dave Weckl, of course, is going to hear this, but no, he won't. But my dad, instead of buying the VHS, he rented it from the library. And at that point where you could have two VCRs and illegally record it. So for Christmas, he gave me my first drum video, and it's Dave Weckl, Back to Basics. Do you remember this one? Mm-hmm. But he misspelled his name. So instead of an L, he put an I in the last name. So for 5 years, I thought his name was Dave Wecky. So we always said Dave Wecky. But then, and at one point I wanted to bring in Dave Weckl to do the weekend of percussion at NYU. And I was going to tell that story on stage and say, I thought your name was Dave Wecky for 5 years. Yeah. But anyway, yeah, no, he was definitely, how could I forget? He was the first drum video.
You went to high school and did the drum corps thing and went to the Ohio State University. And you said you wanted to play Broadway, and you eventually became a composer. What got you into composing?
I started writing probably when I was in the practice rooms of Ohio State University. I would be practicing a marimba piece, and all of a sudden my hands would go on a tangent to something else, either somewhere I thought that piece should go or just something totally different. Ended up writing something totally different. And so a lot of my first pieces came from those tangents of just writing in the practice rooms, learning somebody else's piece, but I was maybe procrastinating and started to write my own melodies. So the very first melody I wrote that I remember thinking, oh, I'm going to turn this into something, I think was 19 years old in an Ohio State University practice room. And I ended up turning that melody 5 years later into my first composition, which was an hour-long symphony for marimba and orchestra, which became my senior recital at Manhattan School of Music. So I got together like a 55-piece orchestra, and I was playing the marimba solo up front. So it was like a concerto where you have a soloist in front of an orchestra, but except for it was 4 movements and it was an hour long. So I called it a symphony for marimba and orchestra. The third movement, the percussion section was always in the back of the orchestra, comes to the front and sits down, and we all just do this kind of slightly improvised groove. The whole movement was, but I used cajon, which at that time wasn't used that much. Beck and Udo, and they all just sat down like in an oval, like a semicircle in front of the marimba, and we jammed and I traded solos with the concertmaster, first violinist. And so that was the very first piece I wrote, and that was premiered at my senior recital at Manhattan School of Music in April of 2004. I think I started writing because I always was telling stories when I was like a younger kid. I remember being at, say, Disney World, waiting in line. And instead of being bored waiting in line, I would have my notebook out and I was always jotting down stories, short stories. My mom would always say I had a spiral notebook of short stories I'd be writing. So I think before a musician, I wanted to be an author. And I was always into telling stories. And that was also a way to pass the time. I don't think anyone should ever say I'm bored because there's so much to do. Obviously with the phone now, you can get distracted, but I'm talking about like books or anything. There's so much stuff you can do. You should never be bored. So that was a way for me never to be bored, but also to start being creative when I was like a younger kid. Yeah. And then you're not waiting in line doing nothing, annoying your parents. So yeah, then I ended up writing a couple of stories. One was called like The Everyday Life of a Fourth Grader. And one was called Life Was Unfair. Life is Unfair. They were like silly stories of growing up as an elementary school kid. And actually one of my stories was the first grade teacher liked it so much. She wanted to bring it to a New York publisher and was talking about publishing it in first grade. But I was like, that's funny. I don't remember whatever happened with that, but yeah. So I always was into storytelling, I think, before music for sure. Yeah. That must have been first grade to sixth grade was writing those stories, and then got into music when I was 11. And so then the two just easily melded together. So when I started writing music, it was always something with a theme or something that was telling a story. But it wasn't until I was 30. So I've been writing from, I say 19 to 30, and I was writing more orchestral pieces or pieces you would play on a percussion recital in school. But I always tried to do something that no one else had done before or something that was unique. Like my second piece I wrote was a piece for marimba and voice, a 22-minute song cycle for marimba and soprano operatic voice, which has now been done. I brought the range down and you can do it as a mezzo. I've also arranged that for cello, marimba, and cello. And these two guys in Italy put out this really cool video in a synagogue in Italy playing the marimba and cello version. And that's gotten a ton of hits and ended up selling a lot of pieces after that. They did that a few years ago. One of the third or fourth pieces I wrote was a cajon trio. And that had never been done before, I think, that I know of, where it was a written out cajon piece. And this was like, cajons were, I guess the plural is cajones, not cojones. Cajones is actually the plural. So cajones were just starting to become something that a drummer would buy and bring into a coffee shop gig or something like that, or it wasn't mainstream yet. And I have to say, I'm proud to have probably sold a lot of cajon for a lot of companies because a lot of people ended up playing that piece. And I think if you're the first at doing something, you're just lucky because that was the first one ever written. So that becomes popular. I think the piece was pretty good too, but I think I just got lucky being the first one to ever wrote the cajon trio. And so that was one of the earlier commissions I wrote. Yeah. And
before you go on, that was Rancho Jubilee, correct?
Yes.
I saw that in my background research into you, and I saw two of my favorite percussionists along with you, Javier Diaz and Wilson Torres. Yeah, and you guys were at the 190th Street station in Washington Heights near the GW Bridge. And I was like, man, this is really interesting. I've never seen anything like that. And of course, watching all three of you guys play, it's my God. I'm like, man, those are some of those things where you see, damn, I got to start practicing again.
I just got lucky to have them say yes at the time and be able to, they played it. I think we first premiered it. I didn't do the premiere. It was commissioned by Drew Johnson. He was going to University of South Carolina, and he premiered it at University of South Carolina. But then this was the New York premiere of it, and we did it at the Weekend of Percussion. And they said yes. That was really sweet. And then when LP, they saw it at that Weekend of Percussion, and LP then asked, "Hey, can we do a video of you guys doing this around the city and help promote their cajones as well?" And so I showed him. So Rancho Jubilee was the name of a restaurant on my corner. It was a really great Dominican restaurant. And I did a lot of orchestration there and a lot of writing there. I would go there and just be there for 6 hours. I'd order some rice, plantain, beans, and chicken, and they just let me be there for hours. The irony is 2 weeks before we recorded that video, they closed down. So in the video, you can actually see, we're outside of Rancho Jubilee, but you can actually see the closing notice on the wall. It's a bummer. I don't know why they closed, but it was a great restaurant. Then we went around Washington Heights and got some more footage, like you said, by the George Washington Bridge. So that was a cool video shoot.
So as a composer, how do you approach decisions about like orchestration in whatever pieces that you create?
It all depends on the story first and what the soundscape of the story is supposed to be. So for my first musical, which is called Song of Solomon, it's a biblical epic in the style of, I would say, Les Misérables or Miss Saigon or Phantom, very sweeping orchestra. So I knew it had to be a big orchestra, and it was a lot of Middle Eastern themes, scales, I should say. And so I knew it. I knew Orlando recorded that one as well on viola. I think he recorded viola on that one, and it just needed to have that big orchestral sweeping string sound. But also, I had a lot of different flutes in there, which Orlando's wife Karen recorded. It was like bamboo flutes, and I wanted a lot of flutes that were bending pitches, going up and down, and to give that quality that some kind of an otherworldly quality from what we're used to here. I hired John Hadfield to play a lot of the Middle Eastern percussion, which was Rick and Doombek, and he brought in some other stuff I'd never even seen before. So I guess it all depends on what the story is and so that was Song of Solomon, and I would say that's a classical Middle Eastern score. Very dramatic, you need Les Mis voices on there. The guy who played Solomon was Ramin Karimloo, who's a big Broadway and West End actor. He lives in London, but he was like the Phantom on the Phantom of the Opera 25th anniversary. He was like Andrew Lloyd Webber's pick out of everyone to be the Phantom. So he was doing Jean Valjean and Les Miserables when I was subbing for Wilson, playing Les Mis. I had asked them to do this concept album of Song of Solomon. So he's our Solomon. Hayden T was in it as well. He was playing Ramin was playing Valjean, Hayden was playing Javert in Les Mis. A lot of the chorus that we got was to sing the background. Chorus parts from Song of Solomon was from Les Mis. And with the help of Jim Lau, my music director, who also music directed Les Mis, we together got a really great cast for that album because they all had those sort of voices that you'd want to hear in that kind of show. For the second show, which was called Platinum Girls, totally different score. This was the silly one, the funny one that I first turned down and said, I'm not the right guy for this because I don't know anything about comedy. I just write drama. And so they were like, no, we want your sophisticated stuff into this silly comedy. And I was like, okay, I get where you're coming from. This could be fun. Yeah. And it was scary because I didn't know what I was doing. So I knew it was going to be a challenge. I knew I would learn something. And these guys were good comedy writers. They had already written the book of it. And basically it's a simple premise of these three women in their 60s singing at a bowling alley, trying to make a comeback from being famous in high school, writing like one famous song in high school. So they were all, and they were singing, the stage was next to the bathroom. So every like 15 minutes you hear the toilet flush. That kind of show, really goofy, really fun, funny, and a very producible show around the country. This show could be done at every single community theater, regional theater. There's three women who at one point were in some sort of theatrical realm and some sort of famous actor in their own city, or possibly had been on Broadway and then moved back home. So it would have been an easy show. It is an easy show to cast and to produce because it's only three women. The band, to answer your question about the band, the orchestration, it was 6 pieces. That was, I knew I wanted to make it small so it could be done off Broadway easily. And we were going to open at the Triad Theater on 72nd. We had a date already, September of 2020, and then the pandemic hit. So we had to shut that down. But yeah, that was, so the band was bass, piano, drums, woodwind, doubler, trumpet, and it was a 6-piece band. Oh, and violin. Yeah, I wanted to have a violin. That was the 6 pieces. And that show was in the style, some 60s style music, but the songs that they hadn't written any original songs except for one. And so they hired me to write these original songs. The songs that they were doing were covers, say, You Don't Have to Say You Love Me, Proud Mary. And they were doing covers like that. And then they were doing parodies. So they would write RSC, Respect. They would, instead of doing RESC? Yeah, they would do Divorce. So it was like DIVORCE. So they would do parodies of these songs. And that was a really fun show because it was totally different than Song of Solomon. And I was proud that like you wouldn't even recognize the composer. A lot of composers have their sound, and I think I probably do too, but it was nice. That was a completely different score. But anyway, that was a long answer to your orchestration question. Goodbye New York is the third musical, and that's totally different score too. That's more of a rock pop. It's got kind of everything. It's got a little bit of minimalist, and it's got a little bit of epic, and there's a ska number in it. It's got a little bit of everything in it. So yeah, that one's called Goodbye New York. And that's got the biggest legs right now, only because we, right after we put out an album, we raised a bunch of money for it. We did a 54 Below concert, which was sold out and sold a bunch of live stream tickets. And then after that, we invited anybody who was interested to become a part of the producing team and investing team. We had 2 Zooms about a month later, and we raised over $500,000 for that show, which then launched us into doing an equity workshop. And now our producers want to bring it to London next year. So anyways,
Oh,
that's the
wow.
latest one called Goodbye New York.
When talk about instrumentation, when
Mhm.
you're creating musicals or even doing them on your own, as far as deciding to use something like a pearl mallet station or acoustic instruments, what do you prefer and why would you use one over the other?
Let's see. Good question. So yeah, I do have the Pearl Emerge kit, which I guess is Pearl's version of the V drums. And since I was a Pearl artist, I was like, let me check these out. And they were really cool. They sent them to me on spec, I guess it was. They sent them to me to try out. I didn't have to buy them yet. So I used them for this last workshop I was telling you about. And our mutual friend Pete Sala was playing the drums on that. And so he came over and we both tested it out together. And we were like, all right, let's use this. Because the GM of that production actually recommended it in electronic drums so that the sound designer could completely mix everything perfectly. And originally I was like, no way are we going to have electronic drums. You got to have acoustic drums. But then I started thinking about it. I thought, okay, this is only a workshop. Most importantly is the clarity of the story. In the workshop, the sound designer, who was awesome, and my music's never sounded better live, but he really pumped up the kick drum. And I was sitting there next to him in case I had to say, hey, turn that something down. But I looked at him and just smiled. And I'm like, I know it's too loud. It's a little too overbalanced, but I love it. I didn't tell him to turn it down. But anyway, the whole point was to have control over the sound, the volume. So yeah, so we went with the Pearl Emerge. And so I think Pete came over, we set it up together in my apartment and we played it. And I hadn't played it yet. He just played it. This sounds pretty good. This is good enough for the workshop. Let's do it. The workshop comes along. It sounds amazing. He sounded great. It was like the rim click was this perfect rim click with a little bit of reverb. I don't know. It was just, you got to get the right touch for that kind of thing. The clock, as it were. And I remember actually the sound designer turned to me and was like, I've never heard a better rim click in my life. Those kind of things stood out. The drums sounded great. So then when I got it back to the deciding factor of whether I was going to actually buy it or not, was I just got out and played it. And yeah, within 5 minutes, I'm like, this is so fun to play. It's great to have a electronic drum set in your apartment so you can play loud and full and no one's going to complain because you can play it with headphones on. Your question was when to use it. When would I want to use it on a gig? The mallet station has come in really handy. There's a couple of church gigs that I'll do like Christmas Eve where they say, oh, we want chimes, but we don't want to ring chimes. Another thing, we don't want to lift the chimes up to the loft where the organ is. So I said, oh, I have this mallet station. We can have chimes, glockenspiel. We can have, all of it. I'll just bring a little speaker. And the little speaker in that church with high ceilings just still soars and it sounds pretty darn good. Those have been used on gigs where I've been able to needed timpani as well. If they didn't end up having or wanting to rent timpani, which I would always recommend renting a real timpani for like rolls. But there was a couple moments where they might say, hey, put a timpani note here, there. And that mallet station was able to do it all. I just set up main stage on my laptop. And in terms of writing, my fourth musical that I want to write is we were talking about this in the email, is about the chef musical. And it's about a chef in Chicago who loses taste at the height of his career. And it's a true story. And I just know that score is going to be half acoustic, half electronic. I don't know how. I haven't written anything for it. I just know that's the soundscape of that score. So in that score, I would definitely be using mallet station and because I want to have a otherworldly electronic sound when he's creating his recipes, that kind of thing. So I know that the percussionist / drummer will be playing a combination of real instruments, electronic instruments, and pots and pans, probably some kitchen stuff, some wine glasses. That would be the soundscape, and that if we can get the rights, that's what that would be. But yeah, I love using and I've also used the mallet station in place of a marimba, which again, it doesn't really replace it. Actually, it was in replace for a marimba, a guitar, and a harpsichord because you can change the sounds. So I did a gig with marimba and voice, or mallets and voice, a couple months ago, and I was able we did probably 6 or 7 songs, Broadway songs. So like the song "Burn" from Hamilton, which is I think it's a harpsichord sound on the album. I was able to get that harpsichord sound and it sounds really good. Or maybe it was just a piano. I used harpsichord on the mallet station. And then for like on my own, the song from Les Misérables, a big song that Eponine sings, I used a guitar sound. So I was playing 4 mallets, but it sounded like a guitar playing. And then for some of my stuff that I've written, I used marimba. So that's another thing that's worked out really well. And it's just so much lighter than a marimba. My marimba I have a 5.5 octave marimba and it comes in 8 cases. And the resonators are so heavy. At one point I told Pete we were doing a gig. He had a trio called Exit 9. At one point, I was like, I can't load my marimba into it. He asked me if I could bring my marimba. I'm like, I'm so sorry. My days of loading my own marimba in the cars are over. If you need to get another guy for the gig, you can get another guy. And he was totally cool and understood. I'm like, I don't want to lift that thing ever again in my life. I just did it so much when I was in my 20s. I was doing solo competitions and concerto competitions, and I moved that thing so much. I don't want to move it ever again. So the mallet station I can move that thing. That's fine.
Speaking of equipment, how many splash cymbals do you own?
Now, where did this question come from? I feel like this is a loaded question. Is this Pete too? Is this Pete Sala too? I played drums for American Dance Machine, the drummer for American Dance Machine. And we played two consecutive years at the Joyce Theater. And Pete subbed for me on a couple of those. And he asked the same question because I just love splash cymbals, and I love cymbals in general, but I love having, gosh, God bless the drummers who only have 2 or 3 cymbals. I wish I was as cool as you. I love having so many different colors at my beck and fingers. And so, yeah, I probably own 10 or 11 splash cymbals. They're all different colors and sizes, or I should say colors of sound and sizes. The ozone splashes, the China splashes, ozones and Sabian with the holes in them, the ozone cymbals. Yeah. So they have those as splashes. Those are some of the best sounding. So the ozone in general is one of the best sounding. It's in between a crash and a China. But then the splashes are I use them so much, and they are a good cross for any kind of genre, actually. Even if you were playing like a jazz show and you needed a really quick 6-inch splash type of choke, they work really well for that too. I have China splashes. I have regular splashes. I don't know. I just okay. When I was playing in American Dance Machine in that particular show, the whole purpose of American Dance Machine is to bring back the original choreography of that made these shows famous, or that was famous in these shows, such as Chorus Line or Oklahoma, or actually we did Pinball Wizard from Tommy. And every time I hit a splash, or if I go, I don't ever want it to be the same cymbal. For me, in my ear, it's got to be it's got to go somewhere. It goes back to storytelling. There's got to be a journey of that splash cymbal. I can't sit in the same spot with the sound of cymbals. I like if it's going to be, it's got to be 2 different cymbals. I don't know why. It's just, it takes it on a journey, the drummer on a journey. So yeah, so Pete came into stuff for me once and just laughed at how many splashes I had. And he came over the other day to print something out. I have a publishing company, and I have a bunch of copy equipment, big Kinko style copiers. And he came over to print something out, and he saw the ozone splash. I had left it on top of my hip gig drum set, which I hadn't put away yet. I didn't leave it there for him, but he just, without saying a word, just sent a picture of it to me on text as a joke. Because he knew I was in love with splash cymbals.
Can you explain the origin of the meaning of the phrase, "Let's go to the boat"?
Let's go to the boat. That's another Pete Sala thing. I'm sure he told you about it. That will be a sign of when one of my musicals have taken off and is on Broadway, because the idea of that phrase, I will send a text to all the musicians in the pit and I would just say, "Let's go to the boat." What that means is I've become big enough and I've made enough money where I can buy a boat, dock it on the Hudson River, and I send the pit a text, and they take the show off that night and just come to the boat. That's it. We're going to have a pit party. Why wouldn't it be after the show? I don't know, because it's not as fun. Yeah, it would be. So let's go to the boat. Yeah, a lot of my close friends who've recorded my musicals and know that phrase. But that's a sign of, oh, I've made it as a composer. So yeah. And I know everyone tells me a boat's a waste of money and it's a bad investment, but I want a boat. I want it on the Hudson River, and I want to host the cast and the musicians and all my peeps and go to the boat. And I don't know, maybe the boat will have a built-in grill on it. Maybe it'll have a bar. Who knows how big the yacht will be? But no, that's what that means.
That's great.
I've been saying it for 14 years, so it's got to happen sometime. Let's go to the boat.
Being a success you're looking to achieve a certain level of success, being a composer for a Broadway show. As far as your playing on shows and orchestras, if you were to advise someone on how to achieve the level of success that you've achieved so far, what are some things that you'd say to somebody who's like 21 that's trying to do the same things you've done? You know what? These are things that you need to know.
Oh yeah, gosh. I don't know if I'm going to tell you anything that you haven't already heard on this podcast, but there's this saying that I'm sure you've heard. I'd rather hire, and I do some contracting too in the city. I contract some mainly orchestral stuff, chamber orchestra. I'd rather hire a good player with a great attitude than the best player with a bad attitude. And I'm sure you've heard that's a saying that people have said for years. And that really is true. Everyone who's in New York should be able to play, but it's more about hiring people with good attitudes and who can work well and just adapt. That's a big, big factor of it, I think. Adapt to the situations and stuff. And yeah, I had one person who I was contracting a chamber orchestra, and I had one musician come up to me and was complaining about the rehearsal schedule and how they weren't in all the pieces, but the piece they were in was like first and then it was last. So they had to wait at the rehearsal in between. And I didn't make the schedule. The music director did. But they complained to me that they would have to wait at rehearsal in between. And it was just, you were hired for that entire period. And maybe they were like half joking, but then they emailed me about it a couple of times and that kind of thing. It was like, this is a full orchestra, like a full chamber orchestra. We're not going to change the schedule because of you. I'm sure the conductor has his reasons. And so but that just put a bad taste in my, that kind of thing, like amazing player, but now is on the bottom of my list because that was just rude. And yeah, I think that's one of the big things. Obviously, if you're a drummer or percussion, or especially percussionist, like a drummer is always going to have a met with them, a metronome, but you can never stop practicing with a metronome, no matter how successful you get. That still you should be buried with your metronome. That's an obvious one. What else? Oh, being as versatile as possible has probably been said before a million times, but that really is true. That way you'll get more work. There are weeks where I'll play a Broadway show one day, a timpani gig and an orchestra one day, and the next day, drums and American Dance Machine, and then some contemporary piece from it's all different styles. And then maybe like the Mexican band I play in, Mexican music, but it's mostly gringos, but it's called Banda Nueva York. And anyway, you might be playing that kind of style gig. So that's the whole different style. So I think it's nice to be a master at one thing, but it's also nice to be a jack of all trades, I guess they say, not a master at any. But that way you can get hired more, or you can feel comfortable saying yes to something, or you'll be able to figure it out. I actually played hammer dulcimer in a Broadway show before, and I'd never played hammer dulcimer before. And it was the show Spider-Man. And I remember when I got asked to do it, I was like, yes, and I'll learn it. So I spent 3 weeks learning the hammer dulcimer. And that's an instrument that no percussionist plays because no classical percussion. I would say most classical percussionists would never have even picked up hammer dulcimer mallets because that's not part of the repertoire, not part of our instruments we learn. And it's a completely different instrument than marimba or xylophone or vibe. You play it vertically up and down as opposed to horizontally. And the strings that look like inside of a piano, and it's really cool sound. But I think I just said yes, and I knew that I would learn it and do the best I could to it. Yeah, I think staying versatile will get you more work for sure.
What's the most challenging gig that you've ever done, and what made it so difficult?
Good question. Recently, I subbed on a show called Days of Wine and Roses, which was on Broadway for a short stint. I think it's one of the best scores on Broadway in a long time. But it had every single part was exposed in that orchestra. Every single instrument was like a solo instrument, virtuosic. The band was on stage in a scaffolding, and the audience could see us the whole time. And it was a chamber orchestra. So it was written very, very delicately at times. And I was subbing on the percussion book, which had marimba, vibes, and timpani. And there were times where there was like a good 45 seconds of just marimba solo. And as we were talking earlier, I think it was before we started recording, we were talking about subbing and how hard it is and how it's one of the hardest things ever. Imagine you playing like a marimba solo without a single rehearsal, and you're on stage, and that's how it is if you're subbing the show. For the beginning of like song number, I don't know, maybe 9, you had about 3-minute break before it. So you're just sitting there staring at the keyboard, breathing in and out and praying that you don't hit a wrong note because you're about to play this. The only thing that's on stage is this marimba solo. The only thing that people are hearing with dialogue, and all the notes are very tonal. So it's very exposed. But that show, I think, was probably the hardest, one of the most difficult shows I've played because it was so exposed. And the other thing is when you're in the pit, you can stretch your arms, fix your hair, whatever. You can scratch your cheek, but you have to think about every movement you make. Everyone's going to see it if you're on stage the whole time. So I had to really think, I can't really stretch here. I can't really stand up. Every movement has to be like you're part of the choreography. So every movement was slow and deliberate to turn a page or to another instrument or pick up mallets. Because if you put the mallets down on the marimba too hard, the audience is going to hear these like clicks on all that stuff. So I had thought of all of that before I started my first show. I just tried to think of everything. There was one thing I didn't think of, and I didn't practice, which was sitting down in the seat. There's 3 numbers. You're pretty much playing the whole show. It's an hour and 40 minutes, no intermission, which, by the way, you have to remember to go to the bathroom before the show because you cannot go to the bathroom. There's no intermission. And you're on the scaffolding. There's no way I was freaking out about what if I have to go to the bathroom? And I not only do I have to walk through the rest of the instrumentalists, but then I'd have to walk down the scaffolding. There'd just be no way. That was an important thing. But I did prepare for that. What I didn't prepare for was sitting down in the chair and getting back up because you never practice that. When you're practicing, it was this rolling chair. And so I sat down for this 5-minute dialogue break. And then I got up and the chair was still there, but I had to play marimba, but the chair was in the way. So I'm kicking it with my right foot, get the chair out of the way, trying to get it out of my way, kicking it subtly so the audience wouldn't see it. You try to think of everything, but that thing, I didn't think about practicing sitting down and standing up in that chair until your first show. That's why subbing is just so hard because there's no rehearsal. So you have to do it as well as possible the first time and without anybody. And none of the musicians or conductor want it to be what they're used to hearing. So it shouldn't be any better, any worse. It just should be, this is what I'm used to hearing. And the best compliment you can get as a sub is, I didn't even know there was a sub in. That's the best compliment, right? Anyway, that was the hardest show because it was so exposed and the mallet book was pretty involved. A lot of full mallet stuff. So a lot of quick switches between marimba and vibes. And one of the reed doublers said, gosh, I didn't realize how quick that switch was. I've never even noticed, until they was watching me practice. You have 2 beats to switch from like that to spin right around and then know where the vibe notes are and look at the music and make sure the page is in the right thing. So that was a difficult one, but super satisfying. The score was written by Adam Gettle, who's the grandson of Richard Rodgers, actually. And he'd written Light in the Piazza and just a really beautiful score.
Technology. Maybe 3 weeks ago, a month ago, I saw on Facebook, people like, oh my God, I can't believe they're not going to continue with Finale. How do you adapt or how do you deal with situations like this? And did you use Finale and are you going to use Sibelius? Tell me your whole thoughts on that situation.
They're promoting Dorico. I think it's called Dorico. I don't even know how to Dorico. I don't even know how to say it because I've been Finale all my life only because that's the first thing I started with and you stick with what you know. And so I never did Sibelius. I hear it's more user friendly, but I never did it. I've written everything on Finale. I haven't yet processed it. I have all the emails and articles saved in my email and I'm too scared to read them. Maybe ask me in a couple months. Yeah. And the day that they announced it, I had all these people text me and email me and say, hey, what are you going to do? Have you heard of this? And I was in the middle of this percussion concert with Damon Grant was the soloist. And it was at the Players Theater and it was called Percussion People. And it was just, I guess about 3 weeks ago. And I was backstage getting ready for that concert and I was actually writing this. I think I told you earlier before we started that I was commissioned to write this drum set quartet for Excelsius Percussion, an all-female percussion quartet. Really great. And so I was trying to finish writing this drum set quartet. And then that's when I got all these emails and texts and they said, and I was literally on Finale, writing on Finale. And when I found out Finale was going down or something. So I don't know anything about it because I haven't read anything. I just know that they're trying to push this other thing in. I don't know. What are you going to do? Are you working Finale?
No, I don't use Finale. I don't compose, but I know Jason Lafredo I don't know if Jason Lafredo at all, but he
sounds familiar.
Yeah, he's a keyboardist and a music director, good friend of mine from 25 years ago. And he had a whole course on conquering Finale.
Oh,
and that whole thing has got to go. It's got to be defunct.
Now he's got to do a new course.
Yeah, exactly.
Wow.
Conquering Sibelius. But a lot of people were upset and trying to find a way around it. But I ask these kind of questions to people. It's like, how do you deal? The older drummers that I've talked to, like, how did you deal with the drum machine coming into play in the early 80s? And one colleague of mine who was on this podcast said, I got to New York on the 8 o'clock bus in the early 80s, and the drum machine got here on the 7 o'clock bus.
Yeah. That's good.
So you gotta find a way to maneuver around advances in technology. And I find when I discovered Fourscore, I'm like, I'm not going back to paper again. I just can touch my iPad. Do you find yourself using an iPad or do you like having paper and keeping it?
Well, yes, I found the irony is I own a sheet music percussion company, but I do really love playing. And if I'm learning like maybe if I was learning a recital piece or something, there is something about having that paper you can hold and smell and it's nicely bound on good paper and it's printed. And I take very high pride in that when I'm with my publishing company and making sure the pieces should all look like a masterpiece when they're sent to the customer. However, you cannot deny how nice it is to play a gig with an iPad. And I use Fourscore all the time. And I learned this when I was subbing for Beetlejuice. This is the first time where I brought my iPad in just to take notes, not thinking it would be anything. And I ended up there, like creating my whole, you know how as a sub, you usually copy your part and you create your own part. So, you know, you're reading the same thing. So I ended up creating it. I cleaned up the score so perfectly. The only thing you needed to see was what you needed to see. For instance, on Broadway, if something is like circled or something, you're not supposed to play it. And that's like a Broadway technique. You circle it, the measure is still good, but you don't play that part. Instead of dealing with that circle, even though I knew what it meant, I would just erase the whole thing and give a little rest, just so the whole score is completely clean. So I first did this on Beetlejuice by accident and then I realized, wait, this is the actual best way to do it. Because by the time I do this, I'm not going to play the show with an iPad because there's 4 or 5 music stands or something like that. You can't have 5 iPads. But right before I played my first show, I printed out the score in color. So it was all color coded and highlighted in color. And so I have this new technique of preparing for shows to sub that I think is just like flawless because of the iPad, because you could really clean up. And the score that I was given, there were measures that were cut, but it was just like a pencil marked. And it's your first show. You have to be so prepared. You don't want anything that's going to distract you. So I just cleaned every single page of that up. I would cut those, I would just erase those measures on Fourscore and then just write the rest. And it was so clean. So I'm a big fan of preparing Broadway shows first on an iPad Fourscore. And then at the end, unless you're playing drums and there's only one music stand, I think you could use an iPad if there's no page turns that are hard. But if you're playing a book with multiple stands, you have to print it out unless you own, I don't even know how you'd coordinate all the page turns on an iPad. I guess you would just press them all, but nobody's got that. Nobody's going to buy 5 iPads. So yeah. So at the very, like I'd say 2 weeks before the first show, then I get the score as clean as possible with all the page turns perfectly. And then I print it out in color and bind it myself and all that stuff. Yeah. So I can't help saying that I do love using the iPad for gig.
I found after Ain't Too Proud closed suddenly, and I thought it was going to run forever. A lot of times you think your show is going to run forever, but you don't really have control over that. I decided to start this podcast and going to venture into other things, expanding this whole concept that I'm working on, because I realized that relying on one show, how many people have the quote unquote government job or Book of Mormon or Lion King or Aladdin or anything like that? Maybe 5 of us, 5 drummers and maybe 5 percussionists, 10 people have like steady jobs that are going to last more than 10 years. Most of the rest of us have to have other things that we have to work on. I remember looking at something and reading about Questlove. He's the drummer. He's also a band leader. He also is the band leader for the Jimmy Fallon show. He's an author. He's a DJ. He's a lecturer. You yourself.
Now he's a movie producer, right?
Movie producer
and Oscar-winning movie producer.
Yeah, and he's going to be a Broadway producer working on Soul Train. Hopefully, I get a chance to meet him.
Awesome.
I became what we did in San Francisco. He was at the party, but I didn't get a chance to meet him. I did meet Wendell Pierce though, and a bunch of other people. But anyway, you yourself, you have a publishing company. You have your contractor. You're a composer. You're a sub. You're a drummer. You're a percussionist. You write. You do all kinds of things. When somebody moves to New York and all they want to do, I just want to play Broadway shows. I usually say, that's great, but you should also go out and play a country gig, play a rock gig, play a club gig, play a jazz gig, a cajon, and find some cajones as well, because it's hard moving into New York. What advice would you give to somebody that's moving to New York and wants to live this lifestyle that you're living in and have the possible let's get on the boat scenario down the road?
Yeah, good question. I would say first have a really positive attitude and perspective, and be grateful for everything that you get, because you never know when it's not going to be there, as you just said with shows closing. I don't know how I had this mentality, but when I was first starting out after I graduated, or even when I was in school and I was freelancing and starting to freelance, I had this mentality that when I graduated, if I could make 50% of my income with music and 50% of something else, I would be happy. That was actually I was going to be happy with it because I know how hard it is. Somehow I knew I just knew that it was really going to be difficult. So I set my expectations lower than what it ended up happening. Or I guess maybe so I also wouldn't be disappointed. But I remember thinking, hey, if I have to work at the bagel shop for half the time and then play on Broadway for half the time, I'm going to be happy. That was because I know how hard it is. So I would say for somebody just coming in, it's okay if it takes a few years. And if you're going to school here, it's a little bit easier because you're here and you're meeting people. If you just move here without going to school, which plenty of people have done, I'm so impressed with all those people moving here blindly. I didn't really know anybody when I moved here, but at least I was going to school. I knew one percussionist. I think I knew Joe Gramley. I knew that percussionist, Joe Gramley, and maybe one or two others. But like, I didn't have any friends. I didn't know anybody here. I just moved here for school. But that was great because while you're in school, you're learning, you're getting a degree, you're getting better, you're practicing, but you're also networking and you have a place to network. And there was a career development office at Manhattan School of Music. I could go there every single day and look for gigs. My first show I ever played was an off-Broadway show called Ophelia. And I got that because it was listed on the career development office. But I would say take as many things as you can without saying no, obviously. And even if it's a freebie to get your foot in the door for something, I think that's worth it. But if you have a mentality of I don't think I've never heard anyone else say this, but I would have been happy half of my living being a day job and half of it being music, just because I knew how hard it was. Unless I won some orchestral audition or was on some, like you said, long standing, I forget how you put it, Broadway show, government job. Unless I was lucky enough to get one of those, I just knew how hard it was. So I would say the advice would be to work as hard as possible, be as versatile as possible, but also not beat yourself up. In this city, it does run you down. That's why I bike the shows now. I don't take the subways as much as I can. It's a good 9-mile bike ride from my place in Midtown. And that's good for your health. That's good for it's like therapy, biking next to the Hudson River. The wind is blowing and the sun is out and you're exercising. And that's a good way because if I rode the subway for all my 20s and all my 30s, and I still ride it, of course, subways, New York, but it can just being in an environment with a lot of people and it can be exhausting and stressful. But if you're biking by yourself, you can put on a podcast. I actually listen to probably more podcasts than I do music. Actually, I don't actually, funny enough, I always have to remind myself to listen to music because I'm always playing music. But I listen to a tennis podcast and I listen to a Bill Burr podcast just to laugh. Bill Burr is a comedian.
Oh my God.
Coming to Broadway. Yeah. He's actually going to be on Broadway in Glen Ross coming up. But yeah, I listen to him because it's funny. And I listen to the tennis podcast because I got into tennis a lot this year. And then I listen to your podcast. And in general, I think there's ways to beat the city. One way I found is biking. Beat the city in terms of how it can run you down and how it can, spit you out and stuff. But I still walk the shows and I'm grateful for them after 21 years of playing. I think keeping a positive attitude I still remember what it was like to visit here from Ohio when I was 11, 12, 13, 14. Having that dream. And obviously, like everyone says, Times Square is not the place you ever want to walk and be in. And there's definitely truth to that. But if you just stop and look up next time you're in Times Square for 5 seconds, and in the rest of the minute, you can be upset and stressed. But for 5 seconds, just be like, hey, I'm here and I'm still making money doing this. When I used to do a lot of Broadway clinics around the country, like I talk about subbing. And one thing people would ask, oh, do you ever get tired of playing the show? And I was like, I can't let myself. I would never accept that. So no, even if the show was second nature and I could do it in my sleep and everything, I could not accept saying out loud, I'm tired of the show. It's just not acceptable because we're so lucky to do it. You got to always be grateful because I know how hard it is and it might not be there the next day. Yeah. So there is times where most of the time I'm in Times Square, it is a little stressful, but sometimes I'll be able to pause for a good 5-10 seconds and be like, hey, I'm still here, still making it. Still getting that boat, still going for the boat.
Yeah, I did that when I had shows. Specifically when I did Memphis the Musical, I was like, I can't believe I do this for a living. I'd look out in the audience, I was like, wow, I can't believe this. Then when I was doing Lady Day at Emerson's Bar and Grill, I'm like, that's Audra McDonald right in front of me. I can't believe I'm playing on stage with Audra McDonald. Then when I got into 10 years after my first Broadway show, I'm like, okay, I had a little bit more perspective. And I'd go out in Times Square. I'm like, God, I hate it here. It's terrible. It's dirty and people are everywhere. But tourists get out of my way. And I was like, wait a minute. No, tourists. Thank you, tourists. Because you guys are the ones that are paying me my wonderful salary. Come on. I know I'm walking through you guys just to get to the train, but you have to have a different perspective, realize that, wow, I get to do this for a living.
I
So
think of that every time I'm walking out of a stage door and there's a ton of tourists, waiting for the thing, and I want to get fast to wherever I'm going. But same exact thing. I think the same thing. I think I should be patiently walking and think in my head thinking then as opposed to I got to get to my subway or I got to get to my whatever. Yeah, I hear you. Yeah.
and you do have to make sure. I'll never forget a friend of mine said New York City will eat you up and spit you out, and you have to find ways to, because a lot of people leave New York to get away from it and then come back with a little bit renewed energy and
Hmm.
vigor. And if you don't do that, it will just tear you apart. So you got to get out of it. Just like in anything, and being around anyone for too long, just that energy. But in New York City, there's so many different types of energies all around you, all the time. In line at a bodega, and people are like they go in front of you to put the dollar down to pay for their
Hmm.
water. Be like, yo, it's like,
Yeah.
or you're on the subway and you're trying to get out, and people are coming in. You got to find a way to find a way out of that exercising. And I this summer when I had my gig at Cat's, the Jellicle Ball at the Perlman Arts Center, first of all, I was away from Midtown, and being
Hmm.
down there was great, and sometimes I'd have my son meet me, and we take my bike. I live at the end of the 4 and the D train, but we
Mm.
rode city bikes from up here all the way down to Battery Park, and that ride all the way down,
Yeah.
it's beautiful.
It's so nice. I'm telling you. That's what I'm telling you. That's a life hack. That's a New York hack where you can not get so stressed out by doing that bike ride. And you were lucky enough to have that show down there. It was lucky down there because I love going. Anytime I go to that area, it's like I feel like I'm in a different city. Like it's
Yes.
the Wall Street area and that kind of area. Tribeca. Yeah, it's so cool. It's like you're in a different city kind of down there, especially in Wall Street area where the way that the buildings are. And so, yeah, that
Mhm.
must have felt cool to like, and I've done the bike ride all the way from the tip of Manhattan, which I'm like the northern part, all the way down to Battery Park. That's a good 13 miles. And yeah, that's the kind of ways you can get around getting the New York to eat you and spit you out is by things like that.
Don't let it eat your whole body, just maybe a toe, but
Yeah,
that's
yeah,
all New York
exactly.
can get.
Yeah. The only other drummer I see biking, I've ridden past Joe Nero a bunch. We went to school together. He was at Manhattan
Mm.
School. I've seen him on the Greenway a few times. We've ridden past together. I'm sure there's others. There's a guitarist, Justin Rothberg. I've seen him on his bike. But yeah, people are scared once they get into the city, once you turn left from the Greenway and start going in. And it is crazy because you're at all these cars. But they've done a great job of making bike lanes and you wear a helmet, you bike safe. You just turn left wherever you have to, go in midtown. I have a fold up bike, so now I can fold it up and either bring it in the theater or lock it up
Mm.
right outside the theater.
Yeah, I was gonna
Yeah.
ask
So
you because I don't have a bike anymore, but renting the city bikes obviously is cheating with the whole, pedal assist, but I was wondering what kind of
yeah,
bike
yeah.
you had to, like, go into the theater, but those fold-up bikes.
It's a Dayhan. There's another company called Brompton that's just really cool, fold up bike. And for the longest time, I didn't have electric. And just last year, I added electric simply not so I would cheat and get a worse workout. It was simply so I could go bike back after a matinee. And it's really hilly up near me. So there's a couple of really steep hills. And if you bike there and then you play the matinee and you bike back, that's already 18 miles. And so by the time you get to those hills, you're like, it's hard. So I bought the electric, just added the electric to my bike, which was possible, just so that I could bike up these hills at the end and still validate biking both ways and not get too tired. But now I've found when I'm biking down, okay, I'm still biking just as hard because instead of biking on like fourth or fifth gear, I'm now biking on sixth, seventh, or eighth gear. So you're still biking hard. You're just getting there faster. So I still get a good workout. And I still sweat, and I'm doing, but you're just getting there faster. So it's hard to because I always thought, oh, I'll bike there without the electric, and then on the way back, I'll bike with the electric. But I'm like, once you realize, oh, I can get somewhere faster and it's more efficient, and my brain is all about how can I do something. Once you realize, oh, I can get there faster, then you just always have it on. But I'm still biking fast and hard. I'm trying to get a good workout, but you're just biking on a higher gear. So yeah, but I love it. I could talk about bikes. I could also find things we could do a whole thing on, but yeah, biking's been a big thing for your sanity and health wise, of course. And then your quads get really strong. So it's like just walking up and down subway steps when you take them. It's so much easier. You can just bounce up and down these subway steps. Yeah, playing tennis is easier because your quads get so strong by biking. Yeah, it's nice to. And also, it's not only exercising, but you're outside. I also have a desk bike that I bought during the pandemic where I can work on my laptop and the bike at the same time. And that's nice because then you can get two things done at once. You can work out and get emails done. I wish I'd done it at the beginning of the pandemic, because at the beginning of the pandemic, all I was doing was cooking and making cocktails. But somewhere around October of the pandemic, I'm like, oh, wait, I got to get a desk bike. I got to start exercising. So that was nice.
So, if people want to find out more about you, where can they do?
Okay. I have a website, andrewbeall.com, Beall.com. If you wanted to hear any of the music from the musicals, or I have 2 percussion albums as well. The first one's called Deliverance. The second one's called Glass Jungle. And then 3 musicals. They're all on, Spotify and Apple Music. The first musical is Song of Solomon. The second one is Platinum Girls. Third one is Goodbye New York. If you want to watch any music videos that we've recorded from Goodbye New York, that website is gbnymusical.com. That's got some music videos where little extra money we'd raised from Kickstarter from our album we used to record some music videos. In Buddha Bar. Did you ever go to Buddha Bar? Buddha Bar on...
on Broadway, right?
Yeah, on Broadway, like right...
Is it still open?
Okay, this is the problem I've had with, if I do a music video, or if I pay tribute to a certain place, the place ends up closing. So I recorded the music video of a song called Make the Story Matter from Goodbye New York in there. And then 3 or 4 weeks later, I get a text from Jim Lau, who's my music director, and he said, he's in the neighborhood too. And he goes, did you know Buddha Bar just closed? And I was like, what? I just filmed this video there. No. So yeah, it's closed now. My whole thing was I wanted to pay tribute to it, just the same as Rancho Jubilee, pay tribute to these places that was special to me. And yeah, now it closed. And I finally sent the video once we finished editing it to the owner. I said, I'm so sorry that I wasn't able to get this out before you closed. And I wanted to make this like a destination spot people would go once the show was on Broadway and that kind of thing. Like they'd go to all these places that I have in the show, and Cafe Reggio down in the Village being one of them, a coffee shop near NYU and Blue Note, and then Buddha Bar up here being another one. So yeah, it closed. Yeah. But anyway, so there's music videos of that show on that website.
When I lived up in that area, it was beginning of the revitalization of Dyckman Street. And Mama Juana Cafe had just opened, and some of the other places like, this is going to be really cool. And then it became such a big thing. And I remember before I left, Friday and Saturday nights, it would be so busy on Dyckman Street. And that place that was on the edge of Dyckman Street, I forgot what it was called back then, where everybody would go and hang out on the water.
Oh, La Marina.
Yeah, La Marina.
Now it's called something. Yeah, it's still there.
It was such a destination spot late at night. So at 2:00 in the morning, I get woken up by cars.
Oh yeah,
coming from there or going there, and it was just so loud. And Dyckman Street just blew up, and it's like, man, I gotta kind of get out of here. And even across the street from me, where I lived at Nagel, there was a grocery store. It was small, and I would try to speak to the Spanish speaking people because everybody there was Dominican. I had a Dominican barber at the time when I had hair.
Yeah.
And everybody was cool. And I liked the neighborhood. And then when I left, I came back and I see I think it was Food Town, whatever is over there. It's nice now. It's really nice. I'm like, damn, this place is like changed. And
yeah, it used to be called Antiana when you were there. Maybe
yes,
Antiana, yeah. And now it's Food Universe or something, Food Universe Marketplace or something. Antiana. I still call it Antiana.
I think Rancho Jubilee was just opening as I was leaving, because I don't think I went there to eat, but I remember driving by it and saying, because I remember my kids used to sing Rancho Jubilee.
Oh, they said that? They like said it out loud?
They liked saying that word.
Oh, that's
Rancho
cool.
Jubilee. But I do remember going to Buddha Bar, and there was also a burger bar. Maybe that's still there.
Locksmith. Locksmith is still there.
Yeah, that's it. Locksmith.
Yeah. Wine and Burger Bar is right across the street. Yeah, that's still there. They've actually expanded. They used to be a tiny place. Now it's a little bit bigger. That's lasting.
I also remember there was a great place I used to go to after. I forgot what show I was working on at the time. Maybe it was Memphis, but going up on the A train and getting out at 207th Street and going up Broadway, there was a bar. There's a place that had beer. Oh no!
Was it called Piper's Kill?
No, it was across from the school too. Till they changed.
Yeah. Now they're Tubby Hook. Yeah.
Yes.
Across from Piper's Kill, maybe there was Yummy Thai. There was Garden Cafe.
No, not Garden Cafe, not Yummy Thai. It was another place right in between all those.
Was it Inwood Bar and Grill?
Social, maybe?
Inwood Social's one. Fort Tryon Public House. That's closer to Broadway.
There were so many spots to go to, but I did like Piper's Kill because it was very local and a lot of local people
Yeah.
go. And that was fun.
That was the best burger in the neighborhood.
Oh, really?
Yeah, for sure. That was the best burger in the neighborhood. But now it's something else. Yeah.
Mm.
Oh,
And
yeah.
so,
Good
so
parks up there too. Nice park.
yeah, Fort Tryon Park.
Fort Tryon, Inwood Park. Yeah. There's a place called Inwood. Well, now it's called Inwood Farm. It used to be called Indian Road Cafe. Did you ever go
I
there?
remember that.
Indian?
Yes,
Yeah.
they.
They changed it. I've been watching. Now there's this huge new, I think it's an apartment. It must be an apartment building that's on the corner, right across catty corner from the post office, right?
On Sherman, right?
It's on that intersection of Broadway, Nagel, Hillside, Bennett, that
Really?
intersection, which would be like, I think it would be like a 196 if there was a 196. But
Mhm.
there's it's catty corner from the post office, and it's just like this. It's right on the corner, so the building is. It almost looks like a rounded version of the famous building, the Flatiron building down there, but it's like a kind of a rounded version of that. And
Mm.
it's brand new. I think it must be an apartment. They must be starting to rent out apartments. Or I don't know if you can own it, but yeah, there's all these new places popping up every couple of years in that neighborhood. But yeah, I've been there since '07.
It's fascinating.
Yeah.
Anyway, we could talk and talk, but it was great to get to know you and hang out virtually. Hopefully, I'll get to see you in person. Maybe I'll run into you on the Hudson
Likewise.
Park riding our bikes.
Yeah. Yeah. Sounds good.
Very nice to chat, and we will connect soon.
All right.
All right. Thanks for being a part of the podcast.
Okay. Goodbye.
All right. Bye.